The labor was a grueling experience for Sharon, who had to endure hours of intense pain and discomfort. She was constantly monitored by doctors to ensure the safety of both her and the child. Despite the medical interventions, the process was physically and emotionally exhausting. She was feeling drained and overwhelmed. Donald too felt the weight of the experience, pacing anxiously outside the delivery room, waiting for news. He couldn't help but feel a wave of relief wash over him as the doctor assured him that his wife and daughter were safe. The hours he spent anxiously pacing in the hospital waiting room seemed like an eternity. He couldn't wait to hold his daughter and be with his wife again. "Excuse me, sir. You're Mr. Fair, right?" the nurse asked Donald. "Yes, ma'am. Is everything okay? So far, so good. Look, you can't be sitting here all night, sir. Please go home and get some rest," the nurse said. The thought of leaving his wife was almost unbearable for Donald. He knew that his wife needed him now more than ever, and the idea of going home seemed almost impossible. The long and difficult labor had taken its toll, but he could only imagine how much more difficult it must have been for his wife. "Do you think I could come inside for a while?" Donald asked a nurse. "Not anymore, sir. You need to go get some rest. We will let you know if anything changes, all right." Donald went home. He tossed and turned and fell asleep early in the morning. Sharon finally gave birth to a baby girl. As soon as she saw her baby, she felt an overwhelming sense of joy and love. Tears streamed down her face as she held her daughter for the first time, taking in every little detail of her tiny fingers and toes, her soft skin, and her delicate features. The room was filled with the sound of the baby's cries, and the excited chatter of the nurses and doctors would help bring her into the world. As the minutes passed, Sharon couldn't stop staring at her baby girl, marveling at the miracle of life and feeling grateful for this precious gift. "Sharon, how are you?" the doctor asked. "I'm feeling relieved, doctor." "Thank you," she replied. The doctor looked at the nurses and asked them if she could have a word with Sharon in private. They quietly left her room. Sharon was slightly worried by the expressions on their faces. "Congratulations on the baby girl," the doctor said to Sharon and smiled. "Thank you, doctor. Is everything okay? Why did you ask the nurses to leave the room?" Sharon was getting nervous. "There are over 400,000 people in the United States that are quite special, Sharon. Your daughter is going to be one of them. Now don't panic, okay? I'm going to tell you what it is. But before I do that, I want to make sure you understand that it's not the end of the world by this moment." Sharon was quietly crying. She was scared about what the doctor was going to say. "What is it?" she asked through her tears. "It's Down syndrome." "I'm sorry, Sharon." The doctor held Sharon's hands and squeezed her comfortingly. Sharon's heart sank as she heard the news. She had been eagerly waiting for this moment for 9 long months, and now her joy was overshadowed by the weight of her daughter's diagnosis. Donald was jolted awake by the ringing of his phone when he heard the voice of the nurse on the other end. He bolted upright in bed, his heart racing with excitement and anticipation. His baby was finally born, but he hadn't received the grim news yet. "Morning, Mother. Wake up. It's going to be a beautiful day today, because you're now a grandma for the second time. Share the news with Kyra. She's got a sister," Donald was telling his mother over the phone. "Son, I'm so proud of you. Congratulations." Mrs. Fair was crying with happiness. He couldn't wait to bring his wife and newborn daughter home. He spent countless hours preparing their home for their arrival, making sure everything was just right for his new family. He bought an assortment of toys, clothes, and other baby essentials, carefully selecting each item with love and care. Donald quickly dressed and rushed to the hospital. Barely able to contain his excitement, he felt a mix of nerves and excitement as he approached the door of the delivery room. But before he went into the delivery room to meet his new daughter, Donald noticed the look of worry on his wife's face. He could sense that something was wrong, and his heart started to beat faster with anxiety. Suddenly, a doctor approached him and asked him to come to his office. Donald's stomach sank as he followed the doctor down the hallway, the sound of his own footsteps echoing in his ears. "Mr. Fair, the labor went well. Your wife is feeling good, but your daughter was born with Down syndrome." "What? Are you sure it's my daughter? My family is completely healthy. Are you sure it's not a mix-up?" Donald was asking these questions understandingly. He didn't want to believe it. He felt that it was a bad dream, and he would soon wake up from it. The diagnosis was a shock to the family. They had been through many heartbreaking miscarriages before this, and they had waited so long for this little one to arrive. After Sharon processed her initial emotions, she looked at her daughter and thought, "I don't care. I love you, and I will protect you for the rest of your life." Donald was devastated. He didn't want to accept the new reality. Sharon looked at her husband and watched him go into a state of shock. He appeared lifeless. He wouldn't even look at his baby girl. Sharon held her baby in her arms in the wheelchair as they moved to their room after delivery. They were in the elevator with another family that had just had a baby. "Congratulations. What did you have?" the man asked Donald. He was beaming with joy and holding his baby son. Donald was not up for it at all. He wished nobody would talk to him at that moment. "Yeah, thanks." He could barely squeeze out, "It's a girl. And we're going to name her Taken." Sharon added to ease the tension. The other man started laughing. "My man probably wanted a boy, huh? Is that why you're—" The man couldn't finish because his wife interrupted. "Would you knock it off, Charlie? My husband's just silly. Congratulations on your baby girl." Sharon looked up at her husband, and he was not there. He was physically there, but he was not with them. When they got to her room, Sharon made a decision. This was their baby. This was the baby that made it after losing so many. Sharon waited so long to have her, and she would love her forever. She had to believe this was happening for a reason. She was determined to learn everything about Down syndrome for the first year and a half of her daughter's life. Donald disappeared. Alcohol and work became his new family. He stayed out late and didn't come home. Sharon nursed her newborn through the evenings utterly alone. "Donald, honey, how much more?" Sharon pleaded one day. "What are you talking about? I'm a man, and I know what I'm doing," he replied. Every time she confronted Donald, he didn't care. It was as if he didn't care about anything at all. Donald's career involved travel, and he made a conscious decision to stay away from their home as much as possible. She would try to talk to him, but his response was always the same. He was joyless. The only thing that brought him happiness was his career. This was not the Donald that Kyron used to know. The man she married had doted on their first daughter, Kyra. He never wanted to take a vacation without her. He did all the things that dads do. He threw her in the air. He was her playmate. He did laundry. He cleaned bottles. And he told Sharon that she looked beautiful when she didn't. He reveled in being a dad. He was a good man and husband. Depression had taken him from them. Sharon confided in very few people while this was going on. The people she did lean on didn't know how to help her. They knew her husband had been a good man, but they worried. Sharon worried she would never leave Donald alone with the baby. She wouldn't utter the words Down syndrome. So many little incidents happened that first year. Donald broke Sharon. He broke their family. He even went so far as to tell her that he didn't love their daughter on her birthday. No less, Sharon was riddled with anxiety. She was terrified of something happening to her. Where would that leave their daughters? She asked his family for help. She asked his friends. No one could reach him. She pushed for him to see a therapist and medication. He insisted he was perfectly fine. Sharon wanted him back, and she believed he would return to them. She turned to support groups. But if anyone had dealt with a similar situation, they weren't willing to admit it. No one could relate to what she was going through. People would simply say that if my husband didn't love her child, that would be the end of our marriage. Sharon thought it was so easy to make proclamations like that, but no one was standing in her shoes. It all came to a head after another night of him not coming home. At the time, Sharon didn't even care if he was having an affair. She realized how crazy that sounded, but she felt she had bigger priorities. Sharon just needed resolution or closure. So one day she kicked him out. He exploded and the rage came out. He beat her down with his words. He said awful things to her. He took everything he had been bottling up and took it all out on Sharon. According to Donald's reasoning, it was all Sharon's fault. In the 15 years she had known her husband, he had never acted like that. "Donald, you're not allowed back in the house until you start going to therapy." Sharon screamed and went back inside the house. Eventually, he did start going to therapy. He moved back in. He started medications. Some of those medications brought on fits of rage and anger. One night after drinking, he proclaimed he wanted a divorce and that he wasn't happy. He took it back the next day, but it was too late. He had done so much damage, and Sharon didn't know if she was capable of forgiving him. He wasn't participating in their family or being a parent. He knew nothing about this sweet baby that Sharon had fallen in love with. He had not been on any appointments. He had not met any of her therapists. Sharon was clinging to hope that he would come back to them, but deep down she was hopeless. This constant state of uncertainty aided her. She wanted to protect both her daughters, and she didn't want them growing up in a volatile household. The rain was pouring down in sheets, obscuring the view through the window and casting a dreary, melancholic atmosphere over the small house. Sharon had been planning her escape for days, carefully packing her bags with the bare essentials and making sure that her two daughters had everything they needed. She knew that leaving him would not be easy, but she also knew that it was the only option. She had left with a heavy heart and a sense of unease. She took one last look around the small, cluttering living room, taking in every little detail: the frayed edges of the worn-out couch, the chipped paint on the walls, and the pile of empty beer cans that accumulated in the corner. It was a place that had once been filled with hope and dreams, but now it was nothing more than a shell of its former self. She took a deep breath and picked up her bags. Kyra clung to her hand tightly, sensing that something was not right. Sharon stepped out into the rain. She felt a mix of fear and relief wash over her. She was finally leaving behind the constant fights, the broken promises, and the endless cycle of abuse. Meanwhile, Donald stumbled his way back to the house, the alcohol in the system crowding his judgment and numbing the pain of his loneliness. As he fumbled for his keys and opened the door, he was hit by a sudden realization. The house was empty and cold. The only sound was the sound of the rain tapping against the window panes, a constant reminder of the life that he had lost despite the emptiness he felt. After returning home to find his partner and children gone, Donald didn't change his behavior. He continued to drink heavily for the next few weeks, using alcohol to numb the pain and fill the void left by their departure. His days were spent in a blur of alcohol-induced haze, stumbling from bar to bar and drowning his sorrows in cheap beer and whiskey as the days turned into weeks. Donald's friends and family grew increasingly concerned about his well-being. They tried to reach out to him to offer words of comfort and support, but he was too far gone to listen. He ignored their calls and messages, preferring to drown the world with the sound of his own voice and the clink of glasses. As time passed, Donald began to realize the gravity of his actions. He knew that he had lost everything that mattered to him, and that he had no one to blame but himself. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was also a wake-up call. Slowly but surely, he began to take steps towards sobriety and self-improvement, determined to earn back the trust and love of his family. Eventually, he came to Sharon's parents, begging for forgiveness and asking Sharon to give him one more chance. Sharon told him that he had been emotionally abusive. He had broken them, and she didn't know she could forgive all that he had done. She didn't trust him. The only chance Sharon told him he had was if he agreed to couples counseling. A few months later, Sharon was seeing a glimmer of hope. Another few weeks later, she was happy that her husband had returned to them. It took a lot of work. They had to fall in love again, and she had to learn to trust him. He had to prove himself to be a better man, husband and father. They started by carving out times for just them. Medications did not help him. Over time, they realized that exercise was his weapon to fight depression. Truthfully, he needed to process it in his own time, little by little. Sharon led him into the world of their daughter and her diagnosis. When Caitlin turned 2, Donald still didn't participate in her therapies, but their therapist told Sharon that she needed to let him get there on his own. He needed to look at Caitlin for who she was, not her diagnosis. Sharon's journey as a mother of a child with Down syndrome led her to a new purpose in life. She wanted to help other families who were going through the same challenges that she faced, so she decided to start an advocacy website. She spent countless hours researching and gathering information about Down syndrome and the resources available to families. She reached out to other parents in the community, sharing her own experiences and listening to their stories. The website quickly gained traction, with more and more families reaching out to Sharon for advice and support as her website grew in popularity. Sharon found herself becoming a prominent voice in the community. She was invited to speak at conferences, participate in panels, and share her story on various platforms. She felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment, knowing that she was making a difference in the lives of families who were struggling with the same challenges that she had faced. As her daughter with Down syndrome grew older, Sharon continued to be a tireless advocate, working to raise awareness about the condition and promote inclusivity for people with disabilities. Her website became a beacon of hope for families around the world, a place where they could find the support and resources they needed to thrive. Donald supported her advocacy work, and he listened and took note of her progress. He had love in his eyes when he saw her. One day, Sharon and her daughters ran into his arms after he had been away on a business trip. Sharon had a realization at that moment that when they were struggling, he would come home from a trip and suck all the joy out of the room. His mood and demeanor would bring them all down, but now they missed him. He walked through the door, and they were happy for his presence. At times, it felt like it took them 1,000 years to get here. She cried more tears in that time than she had in her whole life, but they made it. She put one foot in front of the other and focused on being a mother to her daughters. They got her through that time. Some people thought that she should have divorced her husband, but they had not been through or faced what they had. Her reasoning was that depression can change a person and make them unrecognizable. A diagnosis can send someone into a state of grief and depression. Sharon often said in her blog that when you're looking at those photos of happy dads accepting their child and loving on them, don't let it suck the joy out of your world. Not everyone gets there right away, and that's okay. Sharon knew that there are other mothers out there going through what she had gone through. She knew how they felt. Her message was that they were not alone. For Sharon, anyone who said their marriage didn't struggle after a diagnosis was lying. Sharon remembered reading articles the day after Caitlin's birth that stated that couples that had a child with Down syndrome had a lower divorce rate than the general population, which made her feel like a failure. She didn't want anyone else to feel as isolated as she did.